Hello, everyone. I'm Surya Golagani, Director Marketing here at Datagaps, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, we have a couple of quick housekeeping comments. First, we have muted all mics to avoid unintended distractions. Next, the chat room is open so that you can interact with us through the chat. And finally, at the end of the session, we will open it up for Q&A. In continuation of our two-part webinar on Tableau testing automation. Today, in this webinar, we will explore BI Validator and DataOps Suite's contribution to ensuring accurate reporting system. On the panel today, we have David Small, VP of Sales and Marketing at Datagaps, Shubhanshu Dikshit, Product Manager at Datagaps. And here is our agenda for today. So we'll have a quick overview of Datagaps. Next, we will discuss what BI Validator is, how and where this is useful, and how it helps automating BI testing. Then we move into its demo, where we talk about various Tableau testing aspects like stress testing, performance, and security testing, and understand workbook metadata validation and validating Tableau extracts, and showcase report observability using our DataOps Suite, followed by a Q&A session. And now I hand this over to Dave. Dave, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Celia. So, yeah, what I'd like to do is start off. First of all, thank you all for your interest in Datagaps. We appreciate it. And some of you were in the prior session, so hopefully some of the presentation isn't too much of a duplication. But let me talk a little bit about Datagaps and what our mission is. So at Datagaps, we focus on helping you develop and create accuracy in your data pipeline from the point of data ingestion all the way through to the consumption in your data analytics platform. So as data comes into the enterprise, we help with data quality checks, profiling, a wide variety of checks to make sure that the data coming in is accurate and properly formed. As it moves through your ETL processes, we help validate that the data has been transformed and moved through those processes accurately. And then finally, as it gets consumed in your data analytics platform, today we'll be talking about Tableau, we help with regression testing and a variety of things along those lines. So, the global business market for business intelligence is expected to reach $43 billion by 2028. That's one reason we're in this business, is because people are relying on business intelligence that is growing, but we also want to make sure that people are making decisions based upon trustworthy data. In the US alone, bad data costs the economy $3.1 trillion each year. In terms of the adoption and how much companies spend on data analytics, says some studies say that 55% of the companies invest more than $50 million in business intelligence. Others have invested more than $500 million. And a lot of them really still have the same problem that they've had for a number of years, and that is lack of adoption of that data analytics platform. The number one reason is trust in the data, poor quality of data. We've all seen it where, we've generated a report, it's now in production, and a month later, there are anomalies in that report, and the business user lets us know that, hey, this report is missing data, it's inaccurate, whatever, and that leads to that lack of adoption. In terms of Tableau, there's a lot of testing that can be done. There are over 46,000 companies using Tableau today, and our focus today is really on those 46,000 companies. 16% of the BI marketplace is owned by Tableau, and so we've developed our BI Validator specifically to help test the Tableau environment. That's one of the ones we designed it for. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Here's a dashboard. It has metrics. It has a number of things, it has some dashboards. The data can be coming from a variety of locations. There's a lot of moving parts. There's filters, there's marks, there's all kinds of things that you can interact with and the back end has to feed this data to this particular dashboard. So there are a lot of things that can go wrong. So the challenge is because the number of dashboards and the data elements, those are coming from a variety of places. They've all been transformed. They sit in your data warehouse or data lake and now are consumed in the data analytics platform. That data needs to be verified. You know, as you do upgrades of the application or the software, there's a lot of times regression testing needs to be performed in order to verify that that upgrade is now working properly. You make a small change in metadata, and that filters all the way through to your data analytics platform. You can cause anomalies in that platform. Underlying database changes, or you have data ingestion problems with quality of the data, or your ETL processes have allowed anomalies to creep in there. That causes problems in your data analytics platform and leads to that low user adoption. So what we do with BI Validator and at Datagaps is we help you with regression testing and performance testing and stress testing, catalog testing, a wide variety of things. And these are some of the tests that we'll go through today. So as data comes into the enterprise, again, it could be from your production applications, could be flat files, JSON files, could be streaming data. Ultimately, it's ingested into your environment. And we do profiling at that point if you choose to, and we do data quality checks. Then as it moves through your ETL processes to your curated zones and ultimately into your data warehouse data marts and being consumed by your BI platform, we help validate all that movement and then layer in on top of your BI platform to help do that regression testing, performance testing, and such. We do this through a suite of technologies. DataOps Suite is a separate companion product that we've had webinars on. They're out on YouTube. DataOps Suite is the part that takes care of the left-hand part of this, the ETL testing and the data quality testing. We actually even do test data generation and so on. What will be focused today is on BI Validator. BI Validator is a client-server implementation that is installed on-prem or in the cloud, but behind your firewall, and we have no access to that data or the software whatsoever. So it's secured behind your environment. So we have a large number of success stories. One that I was talking to one of our clients the other day, like to bring up, where they were having 6 or 7 cycles of testing. It's either new versions of Tableau coming on board or new versions of the application. And they were doing a lot of manual testing. And the manual testing, they couldn't get through even 100 reports to do that testing. So not only were they not getting through all the reports, but the manual testing was taking them quite a bit of time and effort, and they weren't catching all of the issues. So they brought BI Validator in. They had 3 or 4 testers that were doing the manual testing. By bringing in BI Validator, the number of tests went up to testing thousands of reports, and the number of testers went down to 1 tester using BI Validator to do all that testing of all the reports. The interesting thing was, I asked them, when you do that regression testing after each cycle, how often do you find things? How often do you find anomalies? They said, every time we find something. Sometimes they're small quirks in a report. Sometimes they're much more significant. But they said, every time we go through one of those cycles and every time we do this regression testing now, we actually find errors and anomalies. So the BI Validator architecture looks like this. You interact with BI Validator in the client sitting on your desktop, and that's where you tell it which version of Tableau to connect to, which databases you might need access to. All kinds of information and interaction happens at the BI Validator client. That's where you create your test cases. That information gets stored in the Postgres repository. And that information might be things like metadata, sometimes extracted data, your connection details, run histories, all those kinds of things get stored in the repository. We also layer in on top of Tableau through REST APIs and Java, and we invoke the Tableau environment, the procedures, the dashboards, the reports. And at times, we may take a snapshot of the report for a comparison at a later date to a future run. If we do take that snapshot of either the data or the graphics or the dashboard, that information gets stored back in the repository as well. So we actually fire, execute, and then capture information out of the Tableau environment. And then there's a BI Validator server. And the BI Validator server gives you the ability to do browser-based reporting against the test case runs that have already been executed. It also gives you the ability to execute the test cases from outside the BI Validator environment. And we provide a scheduler where you can schedule jobs to be run at a later date and on a consistent basis. So that is the architecture, again, on-prem, in the cloud, but protected in your environment. In part one, we went through the report test plan, upgrade test plans, and data compare and functional. Today, we're going to go through a probably more extensive test plan in the catalog test plan, the security test plan, give you the ability to stress the environment through the stress test plan, and then also the performance test plan so you can determine whether you're meeting your SLAs laid out by your end users. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Shubhanshu to begin the demo.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, I'm going to start with sharing my screen. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
All right, thanks a lot for that. So once again, on behalf of me, Shubhanshu Dikshit as well, thanks a lot for coming to the webinar. We'll be focusing on the actual application, a few use cases that we're going to cover, and we'll also touch base on a few of the past use cases. And finally, one thing that we discussed in the email that was sent out, we're also going to discuss data observability with regards to reports. I'm going to try to ensure that each of the reports or each of the test plans that I'm going to showcase have associated business use cases for easy translation. Before moving forward, I would like to spend some time on this particular graphic though, so that we get a better understanding on what exactly BI validation means in terms of Tableau and what are the different use cases that our tool tackles. As discussed, this is part 2, so we're going to focus on the left side of this particular graphic, which includes its catalog test plan, stress test plan, performance, and security. I'd like to get in, before we get into the left side of the particular graphic, I would like to quickly cover up the right side as well, as we have covered this in the previous use case as well. Just a quick run through on what exactly we mean when we talk about validation. In our first part of this particular webinar, we discussed functional test plan, data compare test plan, report test plan, and upgrade test plan. These were focused on the data themselves. Reports are primarily aggregations of data, the connections, the data sets, their validations against other reports, their validations against the same report in different environments, their validation against a JDBC connected source, a data source, their validation against the corresponding source itself. A quick example here would be if you have a report that's being created based on a particular source, you can actually validate that corresponding report metrics, those graphs that the report is created directly against the data itself, along with upgrade validation, regression validation as well. So this was the first webinar spaces. We focused primarily on just the data aspect of the report, and for that we have 4 specific test plans. In this particular use case, in this particular webinar, we are going to focus on the other aspect of the reports, which is the cataloging, the performance, the metadata, the security aspect. Because as we imagine, reporting is not just aggregating data, it's also aggregating data correctly, formatting it in the right format, and placing it into correct locations with the right access to the right folks. So with that, I'd like to get started with the very first aspect, which is the catalog test plan. So if you see, catalog test plan is actually the subsequent sequence that starts with the format of my report has not been altered. The use case here being that the aesthetics of a report and the metadata of the report basically bundles up into catalog. And before we get into what exactly the catalog test plan does, let's have a quick discussion on what a catalog would mean. So what I've done here is I've picked up a very basic report and added a bunch of text and symbols to define what a catalog means. The catalog is the metadata of the report that you're working with. This could imply the positions of any element, be it a sheet, be it a filter, a chart, a legend. It can be permissions, it can be backend connections, it can be the legends you use, the filters you use, the position and size of these filterings, and the list of values for the specific filters. Within charts, it could be the colors that your particular report is using. It could be the axis length and the axis legends that your corresponding chart uses, and other aspects. This happens quite often with a lot of our clients, where recreating their reports usually ends up with them using the colors of different reports or using certain standards that Tableau them itself creates. But as we all imagine, a company has a defined standard that the company tries to follow. And so if you have the system where your firm has a set format and you would like to ensure that all your stakeholders, irrespective of the sources of the report within your company, receive the report in the exact same format, which is standardized for by your firm, in that specific use case, catalog test plan is a godsend. Of course, the other use cases also align with the aspect that you would like to ensure that the reports you send to your particular clients or stakeholders are in the same format as they expected each and every week. The verdict of a salesman had told us, is this was a pharmaceutical salesman, that he requests that the schema of the report does not change, because a reporting person will always look for specific metrics at specific locations. So you do not want the metadata, the filters, and the other aspects of your report changing within your application day in and day out. And to resolve this, we have created the catalog test plan. So now that we have discussed what catalog test plan is, let's shift into the BI validator and see it in action. So welcome to BI Validator. Once again, just to reiterate a few points that we've discussed previously, this is the BI Validator. This is installed directly into your machine, into your Windows machine, and it comes with a good amount of bundling, a sandbox environment, and a few connections for you to test out. The first thing, speaking of connections, the first thing that we have to do is define our connections. In my use case, I have already defined the different connections that I'm going to use for this demo. The definition of connections is quite simple. All you need is credentials to start with, and then correspondingly, the application uses Selenium and a bunch of automation tools along with Tableau APIs to basically connect to a particular system. Similarly, we have DB connections as well. DB connections, as you might imagine, are primarily used in data compare connections, where if you are making your data set based off a SQL server, you would like to validate that corresponding SQL server's data and your report one against the other. That's where DB connections come into picture. The test plan is where you can define your corresponding test plans. As you see, we have a plethora of the test plans that we have created, along with the ones that we had for Power BI and the ones that we had for the first session of Tableau. We will get into these shortly, but before that, I do want to define that we have our run history system as well, where we can see at a time basis exactly at which point which test plan ran, for how long that test plan ran, what was the exact results, and I can go back and see those exact run histories, as I will do shortly. The application also comes with a scheduling system in case you want to define recurring benchmarks or recurring test cases. And of course, the admin options is present for the admin use cases that you might come forward with. With all this plans laid out, let's get into the test plan. Here you can create a brand new test plan, and creation requires you to select the BI tool you're working with. Here we are going with the Tableau BI tool, and you see the new plethora of tools that we have specific to Tableau. We'll be focusing on catalog test plan, and have already created a catalog test plan curated for this particular webinar. So the very first thing the catalog test plan starts with is define your test plan name, the connections that you're working with. The connection and run connection are distinct to ensure that if you're working against dev and prod environments, and you'd like to ensure that your development report is identical to the production report or whatever your benchmark report is, we distinguish the two connections. Of course, these two in this case are the same as can be in your specific system as well. We define the label of Tableau here, and other user-defined labels can also be easily added. And advanced options is just as making sure how much processing our computer can basically handle. So here I've defined the parallel count as just 3 by default. The next thing that I've done here is I've basically looking only into catalog XMLs. If I want to get into permissions, if I want to get into auditing data, which is also part of reports, I can select those as well. For permissions and other aspects, I have security test plans as well. So that's why I have left out this particular option here. But if you would like to ensure that the permissions of the report that you're working with are not being altered or changed, you can select that option as well. As I click on continue, I move to the benchmark pointed here. As you see, The connection that I have laid out actually notes the entire list of workbooks that are available to me within this user credential. Here I go into default and I've picked up customer analysis. And for the use showcase, I can also show it right here. This is the customer analysis file. The way the application works is that at the start, I'm going to choose this particular file and I'm going to benchmark this. A benchmark here defines the source of truth. Once the benchmark is done, the subsequent runs, the connection runs is going to validate the particular new report with this original benchmark report. For now, I click continue and I'm greeted with a rules window. Here, if I want to define a set of rules for specific columns and subcolumns, I can define them. Right now, this might seem like a lot of specific rules, but if you get into the XML file, if you get into the specifics, it's actually just the column type, the date type, the data type of the column. This is something along those lines. So if you look at this, this could also be the properties of the worksheet. This could be permission properties and other aspects as well. What is the caption of a specific column? What are the filter values present within the system? What does the dashboard bring into picture? Everything along these lines is what it's defined within these specific data sets. And I can go in and define specific rules right here as well. So here we've basically defined that if there are data sources which has unused columns, I want to keep track of them. And if there are any data source columns which are hidden, I would like to keep track of them as well, because I know I would not want certain columns to be visible to any report viewer anywhere. So I've defined some rules. I've picked up a bunch of columns that I'm working with. And now let's see the results run. Here, I've actually just ran this particular report before the webinar itself, and it has a particular difference automatically found. And the difference here, before we showcase it, I'll just showcase the few differences that I've done. I've basically moved off the axes of these few filters a little and changed the filters a bit. And what this implies is that my XML is completely changed right here. And if I go into the exact XML change, I can actually see that specific XMLs have been altered in specific ways. Of course, this can be a bit more, too much to comprehend for a usual developer. So for that case, we also have our rules window that is going to keep track of all the rules that this particular test case has failed. Once if you can just showcase this particular thing, the red and green are the places where this particular catalog has changed. And when I get to rules, I can see that, yes, there have been actual differences within the expected results versus the results that we saw. And that's why I see certain cases where data sources of unused columns has failed. And here I can actually see which specific rows have actually failed within the expected measure versus the actual measure. So here the basic gist is that data source unused columns for worksheet implies that there were columns which have now been added, which are kind of hidden or unused from the original workbook. Okay, this is a very specific example, but the example also goes from other base uses as well to ensure that the colors within your filters don't change, the colors within your legends and the report standardization, the fonts that you use, these things do not change. It goes from that level, it goes to the level of the data source connection itself as a whole. You can also figure out permissions if the permissions are being altered. In this fashion, we've basically understood that if there's any kind of change with regards to your report, other than the data itself, if there was someone who came in to the report and changed permissions, if there was someone who came into the report and changed colors, legends, filter values, the filter sizes, the overall layout of the report, even by a few pixels, that is something that is being kept caught of. And so whenever the next time you send out or create these reports, you will be ensured that all the reports are following a very systematic catalog and they look standardized throughout. So that is our catalog test plan. Now going back to our graphic right here, the next one that we want to cover is performance test plan. And the business use case that's associated with it is that I want to ensure that my reports are accessible with low failure rates and low load times as well. Of course, when you're creating a particular report, there's hardly a few people actually accessing it. And when you actually start pushing it on Monday morning to your sales team, you want to ensure that when there are thousands of sales personnel trying to look into your specific report, you want to ensure that your system actually works in that case. So for this, again, I create a test case plan. This is a stress test plan. Within properties, I define what the exact name and labels will be and what connection this particular test case will adhere to. In the advanced options, I can actually choose and tinker with the ramp up settings, think time and time out. This is basically us simulating users, a lot of users in this specific use case. Here I have done as the simulation of one, but a lot of our clients actually use us to simulate 1400 to 1500 use cases. Of course, that stress test takes its own time. And for the use case of this, I basically define this as a basic user trying to access it repeatedly over the course of a minute with certain timeout and SLA sections as defined. Of course, the advanced options showcases if I want to configure users with passwords and multiple login sessions. The dashboard is just me choosing the specific reports I want to work with. Here I've picked up a dashboard, I've picked up a few data sheets within them as well. All of them are HTML formats, and I've benchmarked these. And in the run window, if I go back to run histories to see the previous run, I see that each of the particular login page and the subsequent pages, be it dashboard, be it the order market segment and the return order, have specific average run times, have specific KB throughput per second, and the minimum and maximum runs. With the graphic below, I can also keep track of the exact runtime it took for this particular user to go through and move ahead. If there were any forbidden users coming in, or if there was too much server noise in this specific use case where 20,000 users just jumped on this particular report, what we would see is a timeout specifically. And if there were users who did not have access to this report trying to access this, we would see forbidden as well coming into this particular system. Thus, we've ensured that if you want to stress test our particular system, now what we have done basically is that once we have created our report on weekdays time, it's going to be okay for you to have about 100 users access your report at once. That is something that Tableau can handle pretty strongly. But once you've optimized your report, once you made sure the report is ready for the production, you do want to make sure that after the report is optimized, you give it a test run by stress testing it, by giving it the number of users that you expect, how long these users will actually remain on this particular site, how much bandwidth these users might take, and how long will a timeout be considered if a user cannot access a particular report. This is something that is being used by a good amount of our clients to stress test their systems. Very close to stress test as we move on is performance test plan as well. Before I showcase the actual test, there's an aspect of validating the optimization and performance of the reports. So the way the stress test is different from a performance is that in a performance, we actually keep track of the test throughout multiple runs. Pretty similar at the start with stress test, where we start with the test plan, we select the connection we want to work with, we select how many pages and what's our SLA time if you're going to work with that. And if we are going to assume that filters are common for all work views, this is just an advanced options added on the request of our clients. We add the pages of what we want to track overall. This is the similar pages that we saw earlier. And in the run history, we can actually go back and see the exact run of what exactly this particular report goes with. So as you see, there's a graph on our left that actually keeps track of the exact run duration. We see that after the initial run, there's a bit of spike off at 15. The initial run time, this goes down to 11 and 12 and such. And all 12 of our test cases, we have done 12 separate runs of this particular report. And we see each of the page with its corresponding duration, the time it took to load, the corresponding variance within it, the SLA, and the results of this particular system. Of course, we can choose specific options and we can view the metric specific to this particular page itself. And overall metric is being shown right here. Thus, if I want to keep track of which dashboard is giving me problems on my loading times, this is what we do. Going back to a use case that might help you illustrate this. In such a huge report of customer analysis, as Tableau users, we are inclined to be aware that certain graphics and certain data compilations are going to take much more time to compile and to update once the filters are updated, and are the root cause of what's going to cause a lot more problems. So if you have 20 graphics within your reports, how do you pinpoint where exactly this particular time delay or loading time is coming from? That's where this particular performance test case shines quite considerably, because it shows you the exact time duration needed for each of the element to be loaded within a particular page, and then corresponding variance of that loading and also the SLA aspects associated with it. Thus, with this particular performance test plan, what we've done is that we've ensured that each element of our report is actually optimized correctly. And if there are elements or elements within our system which are taking a lot of time to load, we can choose to either optimize them or change the filters to them or remove them according to the business use case right there. Thus, with the combination of stress test plan and performance test plan, we ensure that at any point, the reports that you're creating are going to be easily accessible to the correct users and are going to be easily accessible to the right users with the specific credentials. And speaking of these exact tests itself, of course, we showcase that permissions is something that we can keep track of in catalog test plan as well. But this goes beyond just catalog. A permission can be to workbench connections as well. Permissions can be to sources as well, and permissions can also be to specific reports. This is something that we would like to keep track of as well. And this is something that we want to ensure is being validated throughout. Thus, we have a security test plan in place. Let me showcase what a security test plan looks like. Let's start from the very beginning, where we have again our connection and run connection, something to benchmark what is the expected results, what are the expected set of permissions for different accounts, different dashboards, different source connections, and other aspects. And we have the run connection, which is what is the corresponding run connection showcasing. This is the run connection which is going to be tested against the original connection. Advanced options to just to showcase what is the processing of this particular test going to look like. Within accounts, we have selected a bunch of specific accounts and we have benchmarked them. I click continue, it's actually going to ask me to run the test, but I've run this automatically already. And I see that between the two accounts that I have selected, between the two connections, I see that there are differences for specific accounts and specific projects. So you'll see that within the project, within the test account project, I see there's a difference. And if I go into difference, I'll see that this particular difference is between permissions of all users. There's a difference between the permissions that are defined for account A versus account B, or connection A versus connection B within our system. This does not relate just to the user group. This can be to user groups, this can be to projects, this can be to overall data sources as well. And we have to showcase an example of each of the following. So we have our test, which is our project, which has different permissions. Then we have our data source, which also showcases that it has a bit of different permissions associated with different users. Here, all users is being used as a no all term here. But if there were specific users that have been added to this particular source, that is something that the application can catch as well. Similarly, if you're working with user groups themselves, that particular user group itself can be caught if that particular user group does not exist in one connection but exists in the other. And if there are no mismatches, the test passes without any differences within the application. Therefore, if you want to ensure that your particular report is being accessed only by the correct set of users, you can use the security test plan to this particular extent. Now, before I actually move on to the next part of this particular webinar, I do want to take up a few questions which we have right here, if that's okay with the team. Yeah, I don't see any questions so far. So now I'm going to shift into data observability and how exactly our application is being used for that. So for this, I'm actually going to shift to the DataOps Suite, where we do have BI connections. And before I move on, I want to define a few distinctions between the two. BI Validator is a tool built for BI validation only. DataOps Suite, as Dave was alluding to earlier, is part of the plethora of tools that we have that actually cover a wider array of migration, data migration validation, ETL validation, ELT validation, and other processes, data quality monitoring included. Here, the way we are trying to push this is that if you want to, along with the other aspects of BI validation, if you want to observe the data and you want to profile it, and if you want to find if there are any problems with the data set, you can do that. Before I showcase this, I would like to establish the business use case that we are trying to work with. This is a basic workbook that I'm going to showcase and we're going to work with. That's your typical AdventureWorks data set where we have different sales based on different ship modes, different sales and order quantities based on regions and dates and other aspects. Now, I get this particular report every week and I want to ensure that this report is actually valid. And to ensure that the report is valid, while I can, give a plethora of rules and I can define business rules as well within BI Validator. That's a use case for, for the folks who have not listened to the previous webinar. We do have that use case where you can define rules directly on the data set. You'd like to also validate the data set based on the previous versions. As the data set gets refreshed every week, you see certain trends pop up, and you'd like to ensure that these trends are being captured. And if there are any anomalies that are being detected, you'd like to capture them. That, okay, on this particular date, we see an abysmal drop within particular sales, or the order quantity has dropped significantly for a subsection of my mode or departments or my ship modes. And I want to keep track of this. Because when we create our reports, yes, we are creating them to understand the data sets. But if there is a drop, that is some drop or an increase or a change within the reports or a pattern that cannot be explained directly, we do want to capture that and we want to understand that. And so where the application comes into view here is in capturing those particular changes, those anomalies. So now that we have established what the business use case is, let's see what we have done to achieve this. Within our DataOps Suite, again, we're not going to go through the entire system because there's a lot of products right here. Then I'm going to explain how we work. We have multiple sources that we can connect to, multiple processings that we can do with this data sets that we connect to. And we can also push the test cases, the reports, the transform data sets, and other aspects to as files or views that can be updated, appended, or overwritten to existing DB connections. And our connection list is actually pretty varied as well. We have connections to nearly every JDBC, flat file, API, BI tool out there. That's something we can discuss in our sources as well. And we can connect to these via the source nodes. Here I have connected to Tableau. And if I go to reports, we'll see that this particular report itself can be popped up within the application. This is the report that the application is going. All I have to do was actually define my connection within the sources and choose this particular report as it's popped within the view. Just to show how this might look like, if I'm working with if I click on, and right now I've clicked on retrieve metadata, what I'm basically trying to do is that if there are any newer reports, that those can come forward as well. But here within change use, I can actually go to my specific workbooks and find if there's some specific report I'd like to pull out. In this case, this is the workbook, which has two distinct data sets, and thus my results have two distinct sheets, each of which have their corresponding data sets. Before I work with them, and just to showcase the application, here I have used SQL, but you can use Python, you can use Java, you can use Spark, Scala as well to work with the data set to your extent. You can maybe change the data set, alter it. Here I've just defined it to basically convert those dollars into numbers, just a basic cast convert. And then I've put them into profiling and data analysis. These two nodes are part of our data observability system. In data profiling, just to go through the profile, you select the data set that you're working with, and correspondingly, the application keeps track of a lot of aggregates. These aggregates are things such as the null count, the distinct variation, the standard deviation, the minimum and maximum length of the entire column, the minimum and maximum value, the sum, the mean, the skewness, and the standard deviation, among a lot more systems, not to mention the raw volume of data itself. Along with that, we have analysis on the frequency basis and pattern basis. What these are, I'll showcase shortly. Of course, if you want to find out the anomalies, the current one, the one that I'm showcasing right now, is statistical based, where we have standard deviation and IQR as methods. But the next one, which I'm going to showcase, which is data analysis, also has machine learning systems in place to find out anomalies. So for now, if I go back to the results right here, we'll see that while there is an increase and decrease, there are no anomalies that were detected directly. There's a decrease and increase within certain ranges. And if I want to see that, I can go to the specific column and actually check. In this case, what I'm going to do is use mean as a way to figure out or illustrate how exactly the data set has changed. So over the course of a few runs that I've done to simulate that the report has been shifting from 2 months and every month and so, here I see that the mean has been deviating quite considerably, but at certain points when the mean was standardized a little, I see that an anomaly was being caught. That's the 205K that we see right there. This was an anomaly, and in one of my previous runs, this was caught. Just to go back right here, I can go back to my run history and see that, okay, the test case had failed in this particular measure. And the reason a test case had failed was because the anomalies were detected within my application. And these anomalies were a sharp drop in row count or a sharp drop in distinct count and other aspects as well. In the same way, what I'd like to just cover up is frequency analysis and pattern analysis. Frequency analysis is us ensuring the aggregates within the data distributed over a particular column are actually valid. What this means is that regular air takes up about 40% of my records in this particular data space. Here, since we are working with relatively small records, numbers are suffice to us, but in larger sets, we will go with percentages. And we know that regular air takes up about 37% of my records. And over the course of multiple runs, if I see that this particular percentage of records is shrinking or increasing, that is illustrative to the point that something has changed within my sources. Maybe the data sets that I receive that give me the regular air value or the express air value has actually changed. Maybe there are new transformations in the place. Maybe it can be something that is business related, and I've caught that particular business action within my data set. And that way, frequency analysis is pretty useful to identifying the shifts within your data. In the same way, we have pattern analysis, which actually is a bit more straightforward, which takes into account the string of numbers that you're working with and keeps track of those. Here, a capital X implies a capital alphabet and small x implies small letters. If there were numbers, that would be defined as 9, as we see right here. Now, if I'm working with any sort of pattern, be it a license plate or something along those lines, I would get a certain pattern which would imply 4 x's followed by a hyphen and followed by 3 x's followed by 4 x's. It's very crucial in specific use cases where you want to keep track of the specific pattern that your data set must follow. So if you're talking about your report, you want to ensure that your report has certain test cases or use cases which follow certain patterns. Don't want to ensure that the data sets are out of specific patterns, be it licenses, be it PII data sets, or be it strings or department names as a whole. So in the specific use case, I see department names are fully non-numeric, and that is something of a business use case of mine. I want to ensure that my departments do not have numbers within them. And thus, I can ensure that my data sets are being validated at an overall level. And if at any point there are some anomalies detected, there's something that's a bridge out there, I can actually catch it. The application catches it for me, notifies me, and of course, creates the corresponding report as well as to what went wrong at which particular point. So here, while the report loads up, again, this report is downloadable and can be accessed via APIs, REST API commands, and other aspects as well. Before this, I would like to actually showcase the next aspect, which is the data analysis, and what exactly do we do in this. Going back to my data flow right here, I've picked up one of the tables that we discussed for profiling, but I've picked up the other one for analysis. So just going back to the record to show what exactly I mean. I've picked up this record, which actually showcases the order over a course of a few days. Now, this order is not just of one system, it's on across multiple ship modes, which is the express air, regular air, and delivery truck. And as you see, there's a bit of variance within it. But I want to ensure that there are no anomalies within this subset of data sets as well. So what do I do? Well, I use the data analysis component. Starting from properties, I actually define what my source is. And in columns, I define what are different categories along which I want to distinguish my corresponding metrics. Then the different measures, which is sum and mean in this case, which I want to keep track of. And the date alongside which I want to keep track of the system. If no date is provided, then the application assumes the run date itself to be the date of the particular system. Here to illustrate the point, I've given a column with a date right here. Then in predictions, I can define which type of prediction method I would like to use. If I want to use a different prediction method, I want to define my own. That is something that the user is allowed to do as well. And then I define what my test case scenario is. Once I run this application, I can see that the test case has failed because there are two anomalies found within my distinguished systems. And anomalies were found across certain dates. So if I scroll down right here, I'll see that while most of the application seems to be fine, one of my dates within the subsystem has a red mark, which is associated with a test case failed. If I click on this, I see that the mean and sum of my express airship mode has actually failed for this particular date. And if I go into the status, it actually showcases me. And if I go back to the specific use case, it's going to show that at certain points, which is right here, let me just pull this a little down so that it's much more easier to view. So a specific use, as you see, let's go a bit, zoom in a bit more here. You see that my upper and lower bounds, which are tagged by the bluish green background that you see, we see that this particular upper and lower bounds are ever shifting. This is because it's trying to adjust to the actual variance of the metric here itself. And because this is machine learning based, it's actually retraining itself on each and every turn. That is why you see over the course, after a few variants, it tries to settle down and does close in specifically. And we see as we were closing in, there was again a sudden shift on this particular date right here, which caused for an anomaly. And if you notice that our raw data set is not something that goes till Jan 1st. It's only a data set that we were discussing here that goes from December to Jan. But the application actually keeps track of this over the course of many runs that it does, and it keeps track of every anomaly found in this. Of course, the one that is raised in this particular run is the one which is in this specific data set. But if I go back to run history, once again, you'll see that we are keeping track of each and every data point that we received at this point. So here we see there are 4 anomalies detected. And if I scroll down, I should see a similar data set right here. Here we see that the anomalies were detected on 11/9. And here again, Express Air is the place where we see the specific anomalies. If I go to fail once again, I can actually keep track of this. A bit of zoom in can actually help me identify where exactly these anomalies were detected. And thus, in this specific report of mine, which is this very varied system where you have multiple graphs ups and downs, which is expected throughout. So even if I change this particular graph, I see that there are a lot of changes and there are lots of ups and downs. I can still identify anomalies without the context being provided to me specifically, because I in my suite have the context of the entire year data set on which then a machine learning code is trained to find out anomalies specifically. Thus, when it comes to data observability, I've not only profiled my data, understood the exact number of nulls, the duplicates that I expect, maybe the distinct values, maybe the patterns that I see, but I also can use this particular application to find the anomalies there. And if there are any deviations from an existing trend, if there are deviations from dependent variables within my application, I can catch them and thus use this particular application to report and say that, okay, there's something wrong with this corresponding report. Of course, just to showcase the other aspect, we do have our reports that are automatically generated, actually showcase if there were anomalies detected on specific points. This is something that you can download yourself, you can refresh and of course zoom in as well. It's something that you can send out to your specific use cases as well. So with that, I would like to actually summarize the entire webinar so far. Just to give a reiteration of what we've discussed in both the webinars together. We have discussed Tableau validation, Tableau BI validation. In the first webinar, we were hyper-focused on the data sets, how we can validate that the data within our application is valid. The data should be validated against other data set itself, which is the original source connection, be it a JDBC connection that we discussed earlier. It could be against another report within different teams, within different environments. And it could also be maintaining the integrity of the report through upgrades and cycles. One of our most prominent use cases is one of our biggest users of Tableau actually uses our product to great extent to validate more than 40K workbooks on each upgrade. They ensure that the upgrade is validated, and if there's any regression, the regression can also be validated. And of course, if you have certain rules that you want to define on your reports, be it logical checks or business requirement checks, that my reports metrics should be within certain ranges, my report metrics should have certain deviation, or my report strings and captions should be within certain systems, you can also define business rules to validate those specific report data values. Of course, that was the first webinar. We went into detail on that. That is available on YouTube as well. And in today's webinar, we discussed the metadata aspects of the report, which is the aesthetics of the report, the permissions on whom this particular report can be accessed to, the security aspects of the report, the performance aspect of the report, and also if we can stress test the report to see whether on production day, when the report is accessed by a plethora of users, can the report withstand this particular traffic and actually deliver on time and with the correct usage needed. After this, we had a showcase of the DataOps Suite, where we actually showcase data observability, where if you have a particular report and you would like to push this to understand whether a particular report is being validated across machine learning codes or being profiled, whether the metrics that you see are actually correct based on previous patterns, be it the actual raw metric or the profiling patterns, we can still find out anomalies within those particular ranks as well. So with that, I would like to conclude this particular webinar.
Thank you, Shivanshu.
Yes.
I don't see any questions or queries coming in. Dave, any with your experience with interacting with multiple clients and customers, do you want to throw some light on any of those challenges usually people face?
Yeah, we break that out into the multiple use cases. A lot of people use the regression testing really for a couple of reasons. One is when they upgrade from an old version or a previous version of Tableau to the new. We have clients that it was taking them 5 people a month's worth of time to do all that manual regression testing. And now with BI Validator, they cut that down to a few people in a few days. They were one of the larger Tableau users, having 50,000 reports out there. And the bottom line is, you spend that 50 million up to have this data analytics platform, and a lot of times people haven't used the same vigor to test the data pipeline and data analytics application as they have their other production type applications. And certainly the Tableau application most often is a production type application, and the data has to be trustworthy and it needs to be tested. And if you're struggling with that testing and getting it completely tested, that's what we brought to the market is BI Validator to help you with that and to catch more of those anomalies before they hit the business user. Once they hit the business user, then things tend to go south, and and adoption will wane, and phone calls are made, and so on. So we're really focused to help with that anomalies being caught in the data analytics platform, but also all the way through from the point of ingestion until they get to the consumption in Tableau in this particular case. A lot of use cases where they've said the testing has gone from a certain amount and it's been reduced by 60, 70%. And not only is it being reduced by 60 or 70%, we've increased the amount of testing that we're doing. And, so that's some of the anecdotes that we hear from our clients using this against Tableau.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for saying that. So we do have a trial version available. You can always check back into our website and get that.
If you want to do the trial, you can download that. And what we encourage you to do is really give us a call and let us help you step through the initial beginnings of how to use BI Validator. It's intuitive, it's easy to use, but we can save you a little bit of time. And we can also have a dialogue about, what are the requirements, what are the challenges you're faced with, and, how does this address those, and maybe circumvent some effort on your part. You'll find if you engage with us that we're very collaborative in our approach to things, and so we love to do that. With that, if there are no questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and we appreciate that and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank everyone for joining us today. Have a great day ahead.